Whoa, what is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Figured we'd mix in a couple of topics in this video. Meant to have a video up yesterday, but got caught up watching the championship games. Also, I've had a lot of people ask me on Twitter. Some people have asked me in the comments to start doing some Knicks games. Obviously, I did a ton of them. I basically did every game during the pandemic when I was stuck at home. But yeah, I figured I'd do the game tomorrow. I am free tomorrow, so come on by if you want to hang out, watch the Knicks game with me. So looking forward to doing the play-by-play with that. Try to do at least 2 games a week going forward. But obviously here we're going to talk about the New York Giants. And figured I'd bring up a couple of things. I saw Bad Dog. I haven't watched his reaction to it, but I saw Bad Dog did a video on this. 2 or 3 people reached out to me on Twitter, said I should do a reaction to what Bill Belichick had to say about the New York Giants. That's not going to be the crux of this video, but I'll touch on it. I'll talk about what Belichick had to say, my opinion on it. Not a lot of surprises there, in my opinion, but we'll go over it, and I'll give my full opinion on what Belichick had to say in regards to the New York Giants, at least according to Jordan Renan. Also, like I talked about in my previous video, I wanted to go over mock drafts, where the experts, at least as of now, have the New York Giants going. My thoughts on that. I'll have my first mock draft up probably a week after the Super Bowl, in which I'll do a full first round mock draft and at least guesstimate way too early before the combine and everything else, where these teams could, be going. Of course, that's going to drastically change after free agency, and we see what all these teams do. But it's fun to get to talk about some of the team needs and get to learn about some of the prospects along the way. So definitely have a video up on that as well in about 2 or 3 weeks after the Super Bowl. But let's start with Bill Belichick. Oh, and also, I wanted to talk about what it would cost to potentially trade up. And I'll talk about that as well. Obviously, that's going to be a talking point as the draft approaches, being that it's at least a possibility. And I would talk about, I wanted to talk about what the price would be if the New York Giants decided to move up. But let's start with the Bill Belichick news. Belichick came out, not Belichick, rather, Jordan Renan came out and said, said a lot of telling quotes about what Bill Belichick feels about this New York Giants organization, at least in recent history. Belichick has never been shy to praise the New York Giants. Of course, he got his beginnings here, was one of the best, probably defensive coordinator in the history of the NFL. Then he became probably the best head coach in the history of the NFL shortly thereafter. And there were a lot of Giants fans that after Belichick got released from the New England Patriots, that were at least, fantasizing about the idea of Belichick potentially coming here, whether it be as a head coach or a defensive coordinator. Well, don't get your hopes up. I didn't think that long before these quotes. My opinion has not changed because of these quotes, but I never thought that Belichick coming here as the defensive coordinator made any sense whatsoever. Is a head coach possible next year if Dable bombs? I suppose it would be one of the candidates that Giants fans would be excited about, being that it does not look like he's going to get a job this year, but he would be 72 years old. And there's a lot of question marks as far as has the game passed him by. I am not one of those believers. I still think he could be an incredible head coach in the NFL, especially if you were able to get him a quarterback. New England has routinely had a good defense, but the whole reason why I thought that him coming over as a DC was fantasy was because, one, he's probably not going to want to take a demotion, right? He's not going to want to go from being a head coach, the greatest head coach in the history of the NFL, to a defensive coordinator. But even more so, put yourself in the head of Brian Dable. Why would Brian Dable want the pressures of having Bill Belichick as his defensive coordinator? If the Giants got off to an 0-2 start, people would be calling for Belichick to take over 2 games in. So never made any sense to me. That, I guess, could be a topic next offseason, but we'll talk about that next year. Hopefully we don't have to. Hopefully Dable has a great year. But let's talk about some of the things that Belichick had to say. This is coming out from Jordan Renan. I've heard this multiple times over the past 5, 6, 7 years, and it's a dirty little secret. Maybe about Bill Belichick and the Giants, Renan said. I don't think he looks at the Giants the same way he used to look at the Giants when he was here. Renan notes that Belichick was a Willington Mara guy, not a John Mara and Steve Tisch guy. And while he still reflects positively on his time with the Giants, Belichick has become wary of the current ownership and front office structure. So let's start with that. I got a couple more quotes we're going to talk about, but let's start with that. Nothing should surprise you here. Like, Belichick's telling the truth. Like, everybody should be wary about the New York Giants and the way that they've handled things over the last 5, 6, 7 years. It's been a disaster. Before this year, we went through 3 straight coaches where they only got 2 years. We've flipped offensive coordinators left and right. Whether you believe in Daniel Jones or whether you don't, we completely mishandled the quarterback situation. We fired the head coach who was widely responsible for probably drafting him in the first place after his first year. I mean, it's been a joke, the upbringing of this franchise, not to mention his right-hand man. Everybody knows that Belichick loved Joe Judge, and I'm sure he put in a ringing endorsement for Joe Judge with the New York Giants, which is probably why they gave him as strong of a look as they did. They fired him after 2 years, and even though I agree that we should have fired Joe Judge after the embarrassment at the end of the year and the fact, which was always my main reason for wanting to let him go, the fact that we knew we were going to have to bring in a new GM and you couldn't force Joe Judge on that new GM and expect to be able to get the best possible candidate. Like, you could certainly argue Joe Schoen would think twice about taking this job if he couldn't bring along Brian Daboll, or at least have the freedom to choose the head coach that he wanted to bring in. But looking at it from Bill Belichick's perspective, of course, Bill Belichick is like, the Giants don't know what they're doing. You give this guy 2 years. His first year, he at least meets expectations. You go 6-10 in a year where nobody thought you had a chance to do anything. And then the next year, I think you start, 4-7 with still a mediocre roster. And then Daniel Jones goes down and you're starting Mike Glennon. And of course, things go to hell after that. But he's probably looking at like, my guy never really got a real shot. So I'm sure that didn't put, give him the best impression about the organization as of now. But nobody should have a good impression about the organization in recent history. It's been one of the worst organizations in the NFL. Next up, specifically Renan notes, is the president of John Mara's nephew, Tim McDonald, the team's director of player personnel. Over the years, Bill Belichick has given advice to people that he didn't really like the setup of the Giants organization. Like, he didn't think the Giants were the great organization, Renan said. Bill Belichick, like everybody else, watching from the outside and watching the way it's set up, doesn't think, at least this is what I've heard, it's the great organization currently. So, and then let me continue. That doesn't mean Bill Belichick doesn't love the Giants and appreciate everything they've done for him and have great memories. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of just continuing to say what he said, but let's finish it up. Actually, that's about it. Those are kind of the telling quotes, that Belichick has gone out of his way to tell people they're not being run well. But Bill Belichick doesn't have to tell people that. It's obvious. Like, if Bill Belichick didn't think that, I would have questions. Like, clearly, the Giants have been one of the worst run organizations in football. There's been a report that came out from Connor Hughes a couple of days ago that Dave Gettleman, that Denver and John Elway were dying to trade up to 2. And Dave Gettleman wouldn't pick up the phone in the midst of a potential rebuild. So, I mean, it's been a disaster. Long before Gettleman, right? We all talked about it. The second half of Jerry Reese's career was a disaster, too. We couldn't draft to save our lives. Haven't been able to build an offensive line for over a decade. Constant turnover since the firing of Tom Coughlin. This organization has gone to hell. And we're hoping that this new regime is starting to turn the corner. But I'm not surprised that Bill Belichick feels that way, especially after the way that Joe Judge was handled, who, like I said, is right-hand man. The first thing he did was he brought Joe Judge back on the coaching staff, like he does several of other coaches after the fact. But I just figured I would talk about that, get that idea out of your head that Belichick's going to come here as a DC. Maybe we'll talk about his head coach possibility next year. But I as much as I love Belichick and as much as I would be excited as if we hired him as a head coach, I've been there. I've done that. I'm a huge Knicks fan. I watched the New York Knicks bring in Phil Jackson. Granted, he didn't coach, but Knicks fans got excited about that. He put his hands on the organization, and it got even worse. Belichick's 72 years old. I'm hoping we don't even think about a coach next offseason, but if we did, bring in somebody a bit younger. Try to find the next Bill Belichick. That's my thought process on the situation. As great of a head coach as he is. Now, I wanted to touch on some of the mock drafts from around the league and just give my thoughts on where the New York Giants currently stand in terms of where most experts think the New York Giants would be selecting as of today. Like I said at the top of the video, this is going to change, right? These guys are going to throw curveballs at you along the way. It's part of the fun of the draft season, speculating, which team is going to take which player. That's what these guys get paid to do. They throw different scenarios at you so you don't get bored, really. But right now, if you look at most experts' boards, where they think the New York Giants are going, especially if they stay at 6, it's wide receiver. The first 5 guys here, and these are, the guys that are the most respected when it comes to mock drafts. The first 5 guys have the Giants going wide receiver. We'll start with Daniel Jeremiah, who in my opinion is probably thought to be the best. He has Malik Neighbors from LSU, who I like. He's 6 foot. He's 200 pounds. He doesn't have Tyreek Hill-like speed. When I say that, I mean like straight line speed, but his quick twitch ability, he's kind of like I would say a more developed physically than a guy like Kadarius Toney. Like remember when you saw Tony, you were like blown away by his fast twitch ability. He's kind of like that, only he's a much more polished route runner, and he's much bigger. He's 200 pounds. He's 6 foot. He looks the part. Like, to me, Malik Neighbors looks like he is going to be a legitimate number one wide receiver in the NFL, and I'd be excited to have him. By pretty much everybody's standards in this draft, he's thought to be the best route runner. That includes Marvin Harrison Jr. I still think MHJ is the best wide receiver, but here's what Jeremiah had to say. This continues the Giants' quest from last offseason to add team speed. Neighbors is the most explosive wideout in the draft. Most people project him to run in the mid 4.4s. We'll see how he does at the combine, but he's certainly electric. He's certainly explosive. Created a lot of big plays well at LSU. You think about the possibilities of adding a guy like that with Jalen Hyatt. And I know, like, the comments that I get on Twitter whenever I bring this up as a possibility, people say, yeah, but Chris, who's throwing him the ball? Who's throwing him the ball? Like, that is the classic response. And I get it. But in the draft, you're not drafting just for 2024. You're drafting for the future. This pick is about the next 5, 6, 7 years. So if you're down on Daniel Jones, which I cannot blame you at all for being down on him, whether it be due to his production on the field or the fact that he just can't stay on the field, if you're of the mindset of, well, we're going to move off this guy, whether it be this year or next year, think about it, as I always say, about the wide receiver that's going to help the next quarterback. And adding a guy like a Malik Neighbors to this young emerging wide receiving core, when you think about Wan'Dale Robinson, who I love. A lot of people knocked that pick a few years ago. The more I watch Wan'Dale, the more I'm falling in love with that pick. I think he could be a great complementary wide receiver in this offense. You think about him, he had 60 catches this year. I don't think people realize that. And he got a lot more exposure as the year went along. Coming off the injury, you really started to see him flourish as the year went along. You look at Jalen Hyatt, the potential ability there with his speed on the outside, his big play ability, and Darius Slayton, who I think will be back with this team next year, but that remains to be seen. But you add a guy like Neighbors to this core, and if he pans out the way that a lot of people think he may, this could be a really good wide receiving core for a while. They could turn a weakness into a potential strength. This coming out from Mel Kiper. I keep coming back to getting Daniel Jones more help, as he has never played with a true number one wide receiver. That's accurate. Neighbors could be that. He's coming off an 89 catch, 1,569 yard season, catching passes from Jaden Daniels. And he has a rare combination of speed and route running ability. He led the FBS with 17 catches of 30-plus yards. Dane Brugler from the Athletic, he went Roma Dunze, but again, wide receiver. Dunze, a different type of wide receiver. I think he's 6'3", 215, 6'3", 220, a little more height to him. Not quite the burner, but a really good wide receiver. I personally think Neighbors is a better fit. One name that I didn't see on here that I thought was interesting was Bowers. Not that I want him. I do not. Tight ends don't typically work out if you take them inside the top 10, but a lot of people feel he may be the best overall prospect in this draft. But I haven't seen him mocked to the Giants. But Roma Dunze was here by Dane Brugler of The Athletic. With his size, speed profile, and ability to play through contact, Dunze is a quarterback-friendly target with the tools to be a legitimate number one option. The Giants haven't had a 1,000-yard receiver since 18, but Dunze might change that as a rookie. Bucky Brooks went the same route. He said if the Giants are going to continue with DJ as their quarterback, they must add a legitimate number one wide receiver. Whether they're continuing with DJ or not, they need to add a number one wide receiver. I think we could all agree on that, right? You look around the league, the Bills, they advance for Stephon Diggs. The Chiefs, Travis Kelce, albeit not a wide receiver. These teams have weapons. We do not. We don't have those elite weapons. We don't have Tyreek Hill. We don't have Jalen Waddle. We don't have that caliber of weaponry. So I think that's obviously a need. And I'm starting to liken more and more to the fact that I think we probably will go wide receiver. I'll talk about more of that as we go through these. Jordan Reed, ESPN, same thing. Dunze. He tied for the most contested receptions at 24 in the country and had the third most touchdowns with 8 in those situations. If things play out this way, it would be the first time in the common draft era that 3 wide receivers went in the top 6 picks per ESPN stats and information data. Certainly possible. I think Marvin Harrison's clearly going in the top 3 or 4. And I think at least one more will go in the top 6. It is a rich wide receiver class. And then the next 2 guys actually had us going with Joe Alt, which I wouldn't be upset with. But if you listen to what Joe Schoen has had to say, and I usually take him at his word for the most part, he's been pretty honest when he's, giving you a look behind the curtains, at least last offseason. That's what I felt. He's really stood behind Evan Neal. When people have brought up the potential of moving him from tackle to guard, and maybe you could make the argument that it's draft talk and he doesn't want to give away secrets. I don't know. The way that I've read between the lines when it comes to the tackle position, I would be not stunned, but pretty surprised if the Giants elected to go with a tackle here with the fifth or sixth pick, I should say, in this year's draft. I don't know. I don't see it based off what Shane's had to say. I wouldn't be upset at all if they went that route. I am still a huge offensive line guy. I personally am not much of a believer at this point in Evan Neal. I hope he proves me wrong next year. He's still young. It'll be his third year next year. So if and when he's the tackle next year, you got to hope that he gets better. But I wouldn't be opposed to a guy like Joe Alt at all. By all people's standards, they think he's an elite tackle prospect, and we know our offensive line is abysmal. We ranked dead last this year by most metrics at that position. So certainly could help us in a big way. I just don't think it's going to happen. That's why I'm more in line with thinking we're going to go wide receiver. And normally I'm not a guy that clamors for a wide receiver in the top 10 picks, but I do recognize it's one of the 4 or 5 most important positions in the sport. And it's a huge need of ours. We've been talking about it now for 5 or 6 years. So if you feel a guy like Neighbors could be that elite weapon that could morph this offense, I think you go ahead and do it. And I'm a big believer in drafting towards the strength of the draft. That's why I pounded the table for a tackle in 2020 when we took Andrew Thomas. A lot of people wanted Simmons. I felt that tackle was the strength of that draft. It was a clear need of ours. Nate Solder was our tackle at the time. So I wanted one of the 4 tackles. I didn't want Becton because of the potential injuries. But Jedrick Wills, I was a fan. Of course, Andrew Thomas, I was a fan. And of course, Tristan Wirfs. I wanted to come out of that draft with one of those 3 guys. And I was thrilled when we ended up with Andrew Thomas. And it's the same thing in 2021 when people were trying to take Malik Willis early on in the draft process. I said, no, I don't want to force a quarterback pick. As evidenced by that draft, there was only one quarterback taken in the first round and late first round by the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's soon been benched. So I'm always a fan of drafting towards the strength in the draft early on in the draft. And by all accounts, the 2 biggest strengths early on in this draft are the quarterback and the wide receiver. So I am leaning like they are saying that we're going to go wide receiver. Now, I've talked about in prior videos that the Giants have to at least consider trading up. You have to, because you don't know when you're going to be in this position again. And if you love one of these quarterbacks, I think Joe Shane will take the swing if the opportunity is there. Now, the thing is, I don't think the opportunity is going to be there. Like if you ask me today, Chris, predict are the Giants going to be able to trade up or not? I'm going to say no, because I think the top 3 teams need a quarterback. I've said countless times why I don't think the Bears are going to trade out. Regardless of what some of the rumors may say, you've started to see people trickle back, though. It seems like now more and more people have aligned with what I've thought all along, that the Bears are going to go quarterback with that pick. And ultimately, I think that's what's going to happen. I think they'll trade Justin Fields. So I think we're going to go wide receiver. That's my thought right now. But in the world where we could trade up, what would the price be? What would the price be? I think you have to at least talk about it. Everybody says, oh, just trade up. It's that simple. No, it's not that simple. And we have clear evidence of what the cost may be. If you go back and look at the New York Jets, when they traded up to get Sam Darnold, they moved up from 6 to 3. So let's say New England wanted to trade out. What would the price be? Well, if I'm New England, I say, well, that's the price. The Jets did it. Jets ended up giving up the 6th pick and 3 second-round picks, which if you love a quarterback, it is certainly worth it. Of course, you better hit on that quarterback, but it's certainly worth it. The Jets missed. Sam Darnold didn't work out, but that is what the price has been in recent memory when that exact trade took place. Now, if you wanted to trade up to 1, all you got to do is go back and look at last year. This was the trade last year. Now, granted, this is going to be a bit more because Carolina traded up from 9, but this was the trade. The Panthers have traded up to acquire the number 1 overall pick in the draft from the Bears in exchange for the Cardinals, number 9 and 61 overall pick. So you're talking about the 9th overall pick, a late second-round pick in 2023, a first-round pick in 2024, which turned out to be the first overall pick. Of course, they couldn't project that going in. And a second-round pick in 2025, and star wide receiver DJ Moore. So they gave up, I won't even say the first overall pick because they didn't know at the time of the trade, but they gave up the 9th pick, a late second-round pick, a first-round pick the following year, and a second-round pick in 2025 to jump from 9 to 1. So 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and DJ Moore. DJ Moore, how would I value that? I'd probably say he's worthy of a late first-round pick when you see what wide receivers have got. DJ Moore's a very good wide receiver, probably at least close to the equivalency of a A.J. Brown when he was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles, who netted a mid to late first round pick. I forgot where the, what the Eagles had to get up to get him, but I think it was towards the back end of the first. Maybe I'm wrong on that. And all you got to do is look at Chase Claypool. Even Chase Claypool, who of course has since been a bomb with the Bears, but even before he got to the Bears, he was a middling wide receiver. He had a pretty good rookie year. They gave up a second round pick to get him. So to me, that's kind of like a late first round pick, 2 firsts and 2 seconds. to move up from 9 to 1. So if you're the Giants looking at that, like, that's a ton. What do I think the price would be? It wouldn't be quite that, but I think you'd have to give up 6. I think you'd have to give up at least one of your seconds this year. But we'll say the Seattle pick at 47 and your first round pick in the following draft, along with probably a second round pick in that draft as well. That would probably be the price to jump from 6 to 1, maybe even a little bit more, if you wanted to go up and get the quarterback of your choosing. But again, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't see Chicago trading out of that pick, but I think that would be the price if the Giants did get that opportunity and wanted to move up to get a quarterback. And then you ask yourself, as a Giants fan, are we in a position where we can afford to do that? If you're Joe Shane and you love the quarterback, I think you have to. But when you look around the roster and you look how bad the line is, you look how depleted the receiving core is, you'd bypass the opportunity to get that number one wide receiver. You look at some of the pending holes on the defense, and now you're giving up multiple draft picks, and you're putting that quarterback in a really tough situation. And historically speaking, I would say it's less than a 50% chance that you're going to hit when you trade up for a quarterback, especially when you put him in a situation as bad as ours. That's not to say I'd be against it. I'd be excited if we traded up to get a quarterback, but it would certainly be a big gamble. In the end, though, I agree with these mocks, at least as of now, unless more rumors come out and teams start to show that they're more willing to trade back. I kind of in line with the thinking of Daniel Jeremiah and McShay, at least right now, or Kuiper, I should say. I think we're going Malik Neighbors. I think we're going wide receiver. Wouldn't be upset at all, like I said earlier, if we went with tackle. But that's where I stand. We'll see in a couple weeks if my opinion changes, and I'm sure it will throughout the course of the draft. As always, guys, if you like what you watch, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.